Hello. This is Nationalist Scorecard, episode 4. This episode is brought to you by a listener to the channel. His name is Michael. So thank you, Michael, for making this possible. And if you out there would like to see me do your favorite ideological, political, or meta-political figure and rank them or score them on the basis of how they come down on nationalist issues, please drop me a note at drakeart@protonmail.com. So without further ado, I give you Ron Paul. So as you know, Ron Paul, most people came to Ron Paul through his presidential bids. 3 separate times, actually. It was in 1988, one in 2008, and one in 2012. Personally, though, I was never that into his campaigns, but he was a very influential figure in getting me into politics. And back in 2011 or so, I read his book, End the Fed. And from there, I started to find other libertarian thinkers, like Tom Woods and Peter Schiff as well. So a lot has been said about this libertarian to alt-right or nationalist pipeline. I think that there is a lot to be said about that. I messed it up. I forgot to insert a joke about Dr. Paul. He is, as you probably heard, an OBGYN doctor delivering babies. He also ran for the president. So, insert joke here about grabbing them by the pussy. Okay, moving on. Yeah, freedom of association is really low-key what attracts a lot of white people to the ideas of libertarianism, I think. And so whether they're aware of it or not, I think that there's this implicit thing that it is kind of racial. And I remember buying into the argument a decade ago or so, and the argument was this, that, well, in a free market, racists wouldn't exist because you're cutting out a huge percentage of the market, and so if you do that, you're going to be losing out on potential talent, potential ways to make income, and that's probably true for some. Some people wouldn't be motivated by anything like race, but it's also true that, and that's mostly true for small companies. I think when you get to larger corporations and such, they can afford to eat some of those costs in order to advance an agenda, and a racist agenda even. And we're seeing this today in the anti-white big tech corporates. Well, it's not just tech, but all of the big corporate conglomerates. And there's all these other associations that put pressure on them. And yeah, the government is a big part of this. And these companies want the government to regulate them so that they can give protection. They can protect their monopoly and prevent competitors from coming up. And that's what a lot of the lobbying is happening right now. But my point is basically this freedom of association and property rights. Those are the fundamental things of libertarianism that white people are drawn to. And all of that used to be there in the libertarian movement. It's kind of gone to the wayside because of compromises, in order to win elections or gain over young people, whatever that means. So that is a disappointment. And so it's a push-pull thing with this libertarian to alt-right pipeline. I mean, pulling people towards white nationalism, pushing them out essentially from what they used to appreciate about freedom of association and about property rights. And Ron Paul was very principled in all of those things, so you have to kind of admire him for that, but we also have to criticize him. Frankly, libertarianism hasn't been successful as a movement, and that's largely because of the multiculturalism that we've been bringing into our countries. So that's a good segue into our first point on open borders. Open borders, Ron Paul, I give him a C-. Now, he tries to stay neutral. Usually, when the topic of immigration comes up, and it came up recently with the caravan, he says it's tough. It's a complex issue. And of course, he kind of falls into the trap of talking about this libertarian trap of talking about the free movement of people. I will come back to that. I'll say more about that, but it's really, it's not a complex issue, right? We're going to listen here where he's talking to Daniel McAdams about the caravan.
It's one of these problems that is a lot easier preventing it. It's sort of like asking the doctor, how do you treat this and this and this? Well, it would have been better if you never smoked. Yeah. Yeah. But anyway, we have a problem. It's in the news and it's a big deal. And it may be more political than anything else. And that's, a couple people coming up through Mexico from Honduras and Guatemala. A couple people, like 14,000,
yeah.
And it may be much bigger, and it's getting a lot of people's attention, and it is a challenge for, libertarians to come out on a position, because basically, I would think most libertarians say, well, you should have as much free travel as possible. And there were times when we had freer trade right now, freer travel than we have right now. But, in a way, a world could be, when you talk about travel and trade, it'd be more idealistic, like if you could visualize the United States as 50 countries.
Yeah.
You say, well, you've worked it out pretty well. We don't like one state, we go back and forth. And that could be a goal, but it isn't quite that simple, because people identify culturally in different ways with countries. But right now we have this crisis, and it's be much easier to prevent it, because I think it's the lack of a libertarian society that makes this thing difficult, because most of the problems could be solved with a private property position. Think about a group of people who lived on an island. They were all libertarians. Well, nobody came on the island unless they got permission.
Yeah.
It would never be an agreement. But when it's a collective, and when it's socialized, and when it's a welfare, and when we get involved in wars overseas, and when we get involved in monkeying around with the politics and the economies of Central America, we've been involved in that for a long time. It makes it much more complex. So the problem is the government ownership. And a lot of the problem we have can be defined that way, but still, somewhere along in this program, we'll have to at least make a suggestion of what do you do? Yeah, that's true, but you still have to do something. So what are you going to do? Are you going to resort to a military with guns, or just what?
I agree. The solution is a libertarian society, and the question is, how do we get there? How do we get there? Are we going to get there by bringing in this caravan? I mean, it's an obvious ample. That question is not complex. It's not complex. Because the answer is very clearly no. These are not libertarians. There may be one or two, I don't know. But it's going to accelerate things. It's going to collapse things. It's going to make people more hostile and more closed off, less trustful. All of the studies that come up from Bowling Alone and Robert Putnam. But if you say something like that, you're called a racist. So that's tough. That is tough. And that's why he's saying it's a tough, complex issue, is because you can't just say, these people aren't going to help us get to libertarianism. We need more white people to get to libertarianism. doesn't sound good. The media, I don't know, they might twist that, right? Now, lest you think that this is 100% cuckery, well, he does go on and he says, I have trouble believing that this is spontaneous. I happen to believe there has to be financing. I happen to believe they are backed by people who support cultural Marxism and want to disrupt this country. Yeah. As we'll see later, he kind of skirts around the open borders thing by just saying, well, it should be up to the states or something. And the problem is it's not up to the states. We don't abide by the Constitution anymore. We've got this massive federal government. And yeah, I'd like to roll it back too, but how are we realistically going to do that? And that's always where libertarians fall short, is how are we going to do this? The ideas of libertarianism are meant for, a civilized white society kind of Western civilization debate. He can't really comment on it and still stay within the bounds of libertarianism. So that's why he's saying it's complex, it's tough. Okay, so he also comes out, he has another article, he's against mandatory e-verify, which he says some of the hardline nationalist supporters will support mandatory e-verify, as well as, the border wall and ending birthright citizenship and stuff like that. But he believes that this will tread on civil liberties. And let's listen to what he says. Some supporters of e-verify deny the program poses any threat to civil liberties, as it will only be used to verify citizenship or legal residency. They even claim a system forcing individuals to have their identities certified by the government is not a national ID system. These individuals are ignoring the history of government programs sold as only affecting a particular group or being used for a limited purpose, being expanded beyond initial targets. For example, Americans were promised that only the wealthiest Americans would ever pay income taxes, and some of the Patriot Act's worst provisions that they were told would only be used against terrorists are routinely used to investigate drug crimes. I do have to agree with him in the fact that when you grant government more power, it often does come back to bite you. And the Patriot Act is a perfect example of that. Now that we say, well, terrorism is an excuse, it's a legitimate excuse to encroach on civil liberties. Well, now we're seeing white nationalists are terrorists. They're being declared terrorists by the government. And that is scary. Now, he wouldn't defend white nationalists. Ron Paul would point to people like libertarians, people who are critical of the government. But it's interesting, right? Because usually libertarians, they do receive some tyranny. They receive some of the blunt of the tyranny, but it's oftentimes the people who are mixing in race with some of their rhetoric, and the white nationalists, some of the more extreme fringes of that get crushed the first, because very few people will object, unfortunately, despite they're claiming, despite the fact that they claim to love free speech, they don't want to protect that because, I could be associated with something bad and icky. So yeah, it's being used against common sense white people. So he definitely has a point there. When the wrong people get control of the government, and yes, I do say when, because I think it's kind of an inevitability. That's why it's hard for me to go in and all in on politics and say, yes, this is the ultimate solution. It's like, yeah, you can get some short-term solutions. Absolutely. We've seen that with Trump. I think we're at least getting more time out of it. But how long will that last? This is what the emperors of Rome noticed too. Over time, these great leaders fall to the wayside and things become corrupt. And then it begets more corruption. So the libertarians score a point there. They've definitely got a point. But I do say that he's being a bit autistic about some of these issues. The E-Verify, I don't know. It's like, yeah, it definitely could be a problem down the road, but so I guess my conclusion is E-Verify wouldn't be the first thing I would go to. I'd be suspicious if the government comes out and they say, we're going to do E-Verify, but nothing else. We're going to do E-Verify instead of the wall. Yeah, I don't think so, bud. That's not a compromise I'm willing to go to. But, you know, if we can somehow get all of these things, why wouldn't you? I mean, we got to have a wall. We just have to. And, you know, as a libertarian, I'm not going to gripe when Trump goes and puts military on the border. Because that's really what the military's meant to do, is defend the country. And we'll get into the anti-war stuff. Ron Paul's very good on that. But I don't have a problem. We got to defend this land. Otherwise, it's going to fall. It's going to crumble. And unfortunately, we are one country right now. I would love for it to be more decentralized, but we got to work within what we have here. So yeah, he's also got a piece talking about Jeff Sessions called "Just Say No to Jeff Sessions," and the whole thing he's talking about the drug war. You know, because Sessions is taking power away from the states to decide marijuana policies. He apparently reversed an Obama-era policy telling feds not to prosecute for marijuana use in states where that is legalized. And so it's another thing like, yeah, I guess I agree with you, but priorities, dude. Why is this the most important thing? Well, you're not really going to get too much pushback, right? It's kind of easy to talk about. You're going to have a lot of lefties who are like on your side. And I'm just done with this whole libertarian idea that, oh, well, the left has some good ideas and the right has a couple of good ideas. And hey, let's just put them all together. And no, it's a war. So it's not just a debate anymore. And that doesn't mean I want all of these things, but when you're talking about Jeff Sessions, he's done a lot of great things on the immigration front, on the judges. He's basically writing a structure, a legislation, if you will. He's writing these precedents to give to the judges at the lower courts so that they will know how to rule on these issues. You know, that is a responsibility of the Attorney General. And from what I've seen in the past, we've just had Attorney Generals who allow these liberal judges to obfuscate everything. Anytime they lose power in the executive or the legislative, they've got this fallback, right? They've got this block stop of the judiciary to say, oh, you can't do that, even when it's outside of the judiciary's jurisdiction. And so one of the great things that Jeff Sessions is doing is he's laying down the law, setting these precedents, and he's slowly cleaning, along with Trump, cleaning up the judiciary so that things can actually get accomplished legislatively. So that's very important. He's made some good rulings on immigration, as much as, you know, he can do without the legislative body, without Congress, the majority in Congress. So it's like, yeah, I wish Ron Paul had made some kind of nod to these other issues, but I guess these other issues aren't important to him, right? Because of his stance on immigration as being something like a free movement of people. No, that's not what it is. It is Okay, let's put it this way. There is a way that Dr. Paul can be anti-immigration and not contradict any of his libertarian principles. It's pretty easy. You just have to say, until we get rid of government, or at least, I don't know, he's never gone full anarcho-capitalism, right? But at least until we get back to a constitutional government, right? That's what he wants. Until we get back to that, we need to stop all permanent immigration because it's a violation of property rights. The government can't just give the country away to foreigners. And you might say, well, the government doesn't own... Yes, but there are people who pay taxes, right? And the people coming into this country, frankly, a lot of them are not going to be taxes. They're going to be drains on the system. And I know Ron Paul is for ending the welfare system, and he talks about that. But you have to draw this line where it's like, until we get some better laws and reduce the size of this government, there's no way that these people coming in here, making this a multicultural, forget about multiracial, but just like people don't speak the same language, it's going to create all these divisions and things are going to escalate. So you don't have to give up your principles. You can just say, this is the way things are now. It's an approximation of property rights to say that the taxpayers own the land, they own the government. I know it doesn't work like that in principle, and we need to work towards that, but we need to preserve what we have so that we can work towards that without allowing these foreigners who are going to trespass on us and destroy our social systems, corrupt and coercive though they may be. Next up is cultural Marxism. And I give Ron Paul an A- here. I don't know how much he really talks about this. His main talking points are always anti-war, anti-Federal Reserve. But the one thing that he does also push, another point, is homeschooling. And he sort of sees this as a solution for the cultural Marxism that pervades our society. I believe he was talking about this after the Parkland shooting, where a lot of people were starting to look at, not just libertarians, but others, Democrats, Republicans, looking at homeschooling as an option because just it's a safety issue, not let alone the fact that people don't agree with what schools are teaching their kids for religious reasons or for political reasons. He says here, many parents choose homeschooling as a means of protecting their children from federal education reforms such as Common Core. Other parents are motivated by a desire to protect their children from the cultural Marxism that has infiltrated many schools. The spread of cultural Marxism has contributed to the dumbing down of public education. Too many government schools are more... I love that he says government schools and not public schools. It's much more derogatory, so let's use that. Too many government schools are more concerned with promoting political correctness than ensuring that students receive a good education. Even if cultural Marxism did not dumb down education, concerns that government schools are indoctrinating children with beliefs that conflict with parents' political, social, and even religious beliefs would motivate many families to homeschool. He then goes on and talks about his attempt to kind of rectify this, and to his credit, he's helped to get off the ground this Ron Paul curriculum, which is a homeschooling resource for parents. The website is ronpaulcurriculum.com. He goes on, while government schools and even many private schools pretend religion plays no significant role in history, my curriculum addresses the crucial role religion played in the development of Western civilization. However, the materials are drafted in such a way that any Christian, Jewish, Muslim, or atheist parent can feel comfortable using the curriculum. Now, I could have done without that last part. Why do you even need to say that? Like, other people don't say that. You know, this is just how it is. What you think we're going to offend? I mean, I have no control over whether they're comfortable or not. So that's kind of weird, and it gets into you can tell he's a politician. Let's see. He knows when the things that are mandatory to say, he says them at the right times. So he's used to that. He's good at it, and that's why he's gotten as far as he has, I think. So that's good. I guess I can't fault him too much for that. But just from a nationalist perspective, it raises some eyebrows. So I like that. You know, he acknowledges that religion is important. The next step is just realizing that religion and race and culture are very, very intertwined, and you can't really separate them very easily. So Ron Paul, yes, he does push back against cultural Marxism, and that's kind of easy for him to do because it's got the word Marxism, which is like, well, socialism. It's a cultural subversion with the aim of pushing Marxism or socialism. And this is a good opportunity to, point out one of my earliest videos, really, which is where I took a speech from Ron Paul, and he was talking about the great myths about socialism. I'll link to that here. Okay, so free speech. Once again, I give him an A-. And really, I think he's pretty good on it. It's just an A-. It's not higher because he doesn't talk about it enough, I don't think. So on his website, the Ron Paul Institute, which is the think tank that he helped form, there is an article. Now, it is not written by Ron Paul, but it is interesting nonetheless, and it's very relevant to the recent murder in Pittsburgh, where there was a gunman who went into a synagogue and started to kill people there. And this story has been used to say we need to destroy anti-Semitism anywhere it rears its ugly head. You hear that phrase used quite a bit. And of course the question is, well, what do you mean by anti-Semitism? If anti-Semitism means going out and doing what this guy did and killing Jews, then that's one thing. But if it means criticizing Jews, then I have to strongly stand against that, because I think it's important that we have free speech and that people are allowed to be criticized. And so this article here is talking about the alternative platform to Twitter called Gab. It's been called by some to be sort of the last place where anti-Semitism... let me see if I can get some of these quotes. Oh yeah, Brian Krasenstein. 3 months ago, we spoke out about the Nazi-loving social media platform Get on Gab. Oh, that's the handle. After Nazis threatened Ed Krasen and me. Today it turns out that the Pittsburgh shooter, Robert Bowers, was a prominent member on Gab. Shut down Gab! So they want to shut it down. And that's not good. And I was encouraged to see an article on the Ron Paul Institute saying that this is Orwellian and cannot be allowed. Cannot allow the state, but also these corporate companies who are involved with the state, to shut down free speech. Right now, that is probably the front lines, if you will, for truth, for our side to win this war. That is the front line, is free speech. And so if you're for free speech, frankly, I welcome you. If you're actually for free speech, not just the speech that you agree with. yeah, so we're gonna see a lot of this, this violence, and you can't connect somebody's speech to somebody else's violence. You can't just say, oh, this person is, unless they're openly saying go out and kill people, which I don't know anyone on Gab or anyone in the alt-right or anything who has said that. But somehow you point out facts that are inconvenient to a certain group, and then suddenly you're responsible for these things. No, this is a problem that has been bubbling up for many, many years, and the mainstream media is more responsible for it than anyone. And the people who want to quelch free speech, they are the ones responsible that are most responsible, other than the person themselves. Because if Jordan Peterson even has said this, if you don't allow for speech, if we can't talk, then there's inevitably going to be violence. And the libertarians have said for a long time that government is violence, government is force. Yes, absolutely. But it's not the only place where force is being used either. There are other... Government versus the people is not the only battle line that's going on. It may not even be the most important battle line. But it is very easy and comfortable to talk about that. And why is that? Why has Ron Paul not been shut off Twitter and kicked off all these things? If it's truly the government that's the biggest enemy, why is he still there? Why aren't they coming after him? Because they are coming after us. People who stand up for white people, people who call out the anti-white discrimination where they see it. And Ron Paul occasionally dips into that, but it's not enough, in my opinion. Okay, is Ron Paul condemned by the elite? Well, I was just sort of talking about this a minute ago. So, good segue again. Another good segue. I give him a B on this. And the reason that it is not lower is frankly because of his anti-war position. That does get a lot of elites mad, believe it or not, when you start saying you're anti-war. So, okay, how did Ron Paul lead to Trump? How did that happen? Because I do think that he laid the groundwork through his campaigns for the movement which came about in 2016, 2015, that elected Donald Trump. And he did this by, I don't think his goal was to win. Well, I could be wrong, but I think he knew he probably wasn't going to win, but that he could at least get a message out. And he had this incredible grassroots support that was replicated in the Donald Trump election. But he also did something important. He planted the idea in people's minds that there is a third way. And the third way, it's not necessarily libertarianism, right? By that I mean socially liberal, economically conservative. What he did is he planted the idea that people didn't have to choose between the aggression of the neocons and the, what I'll call, passo-masochism. Like, passive and masochistic. The passo-masochism of the Democrats. So this got a lot of people thinking, and what I love about it is because it's not just political. So Stefan Molyneux posts a bit, the political is the personal. And in this case, the Ron Paul movement, it was something deeper, I think. It was about standing up for yourself and not getting pushed around but also not being a bully yourself. And believe it or not, that's very hard to do, especially in a world where people are raised very badly, we do have that world today. Now, granted, people might have been raised even worse in the past, but we have a long way to go when it comes to getting this child-rearing thing right. My parents had a lot of problems in this. Maybe yours did too. But I think this is kind of a new idea for people, that there's this thing called assertiveness. And it means that you're not the aggressor. You're not a NAP violator, in other words, initiating the use of force. But you're also not afraid to use force. You will stand your ground. And that's what else is America but that? I mean, the real America, the founding principles of America. It's exactly that. You know, we had these great men who were non-interventionist, but they also carried themselves well, right? We had this aristocracy, and at least at the beginning, they knew they were fighting for ideals, and they were not driven by lust or corruption or anything. I think that many of them had a moral compass. I don't want to romanticize them too much. But at least the idea of America is exactly this, is that, you know, it's that idea like, yes, we have the biggest military, and we're not going to use it unless we have to. And we do have to, just not where we're using it now. We have to use it to defend against the invaders who are crossing our borders. But we can't even do that. And so what a sorry state we're in. Right? Because think about it. The enemies to America, they're coming from inside the country. And I think that is why Ron Paul, that's why he was able to have such enormous success with his anti-war philosophy. It's because he was hitting it right on the head. He didn't talk about the domestic enemies as much as he should have. He just had this idea that somehow if we rein in our spending, and if we stop the interventionism and all these Middle Eastern wars, well, somehow that'll be enough to fix things. Anyway, let's listen to a clip of Ron Paul in the debates of 2008, responding to Mitt Romney's answer about should the president be able to declare war without Congress.
Thank you, Governor Romney. That raises the question, if you were President of the United States, would you need to go to Congress to get authorization to take military action against Iran's nuclear facilities?
You sit down with your attorneys and tell you what you have to do, but obviously the President of the United States has to do what's in the best interest of the United States.
Did he need it?
We're going to let the lawyers sort out what he needed to do and what he didn't need to do.
Congressman Paul, do you believe the President needs authorization of Congress to attack strategic targets in Iran, nuclear facilities?
Absolutely. This idea of going and talking to attorneys totally baffles me. Why don't we just open up the Constitution and read it? You're not allowed to go to war without a declaration of war. Now, as far as fleeting enemies go, yes, if there's an imminent attack on us, we've never had that happen in 220 years. The thought that the Iranians could pose an imminent attack on the United States is preposterous. There's no way. This is just war propaganda, continued war propaganda, preparing this nation to go to war and spread this war not only in Iraq but into Iran unconstitutionally. It is a road to disaster for us as a nation. It's a road to our financial disaster if we don't read the Constitution once in a while.
Around the horn, Congressman.
So one of the phrases that Ron Paul uses pretty frequently is war propaganda. And I didn't realize this until I was sort of looking through some and researching for this video, that he used that term, and that's great. That's great because it got through to people that, hey, what I'm hearing is like pre-programmed stuff. And fortunately, it's become very, very hard to stir people up to war nowadays. The public is very, very opposed to it. They're just not buying in. They don't want to bomb Iran. They don't want to go to war with Russia, okay? So it's getting harder and harder for the propagandists to conduct their warmongering. And we owe Ron Paul a debt, because without him, I don't think that would have followed. He laid the groundwork for Trump, who also was very opposed to war. I remember when Trump was campaigning in South Carolina, which was like a big George W. Bush state, and it was supposed to be a sure thing for Jeb, but he came out and he said, these wars are too much. We should pull our troops out of there because we've been there for like a decade, and what are we getting out of it? Nothing. So that was groundwork that was laid by Ron Paul, of course. And now, who are the ones that are anti-war? I mean, strangely, it's the alt-right. It's the white nationalists who are like the ones going out and having anti-war rallies. And you have the Antifa, who are supposed to now be for war. Man, did you ever think you would see the day? But that just shows you how much the Republican Party has changed. So we have to thank Ron Paul, because frankly, that is a huge thing. I probably don't talk about it enough, but it is extremely detrimental in every way. It's costly. It costs us in debt and military that gets destroyed, and it costs lives, of course. And for what? For what? Who's benefiting from that? Well, I think we know who's benefiting. It is the elite. It is the elite. So, of course, they're going to criticize him when he is coming out and being anti-war. And, because he didn't really have a chance of winning, they didn't have to fully attack him like they did Trump. They could just sort of laugh him off. Like, look at this old funny guy who, oh, he's a non-interventionist. Okay, Grandpa, why don't you just sit back and let the adults take care of things? They laughed him off, and well, he has a lot of charisma, but he didn't have the pizzazz that would awe and entertain people and spin these things back on the media. But what he did have was eloquence and passion, and I think that really came through for people, at least the ones who were paying attention and are not just NPCs. And they sort of woke up and they said, wow, this guy's great. Maybe politics is not a dead end after all. So that is how he laid the ground for Trump. And I think a lot of people, they don't give him enough credit for making the Trump presidency a possibility. Okay, so is Ron Paul pro-white / pro-Western? Well, not so much. I would give him a C- here. I would say that Ron Paul is not pro-Western. He's pro all of the stuff that makes all the stuff that Western civilization produces. Because that's what libertarian is. It's kind of a product, right? It's not just some means by which you plug in. Okay, I'm going to plug in the libertarian programming here. Here we go. Plug it into the CPU. And all of a sudden it boots up and yeah, we got libertarianism. No. You get libertarianism through sacrifice, through grit, not being afraid to talk about race realism. In my opinion, Dr. Paul, fails this test, or comes pretty close to failing it. I would say that he doesn't have any loyalty except to the ideas. And, I'm a philosopher too, I like to think, and I do have an attachment to ideas as well. But we're also animals, right? We have to accept that reality and work with what we can to ensure that these ideas continue to propagate. Ideas are great in a society which is peaceful. So it makes total sense that he wants peace and that he would rally for peace. Unfortunately, the war is already out there, right? And it's not just happening over there, across the ocean. It's here, but it's latent. We can't really see it. And yes, I'm talking about a culture war, but culture wars are not won on ideas. They're won on propaganda, they're won on emotions, rhetoric. I would love to get back to a day when we can actually debate about libertarian principles and decide for ourselves that that's what we want to do. But we need to lay the groundwork for that. So we need someone else besides Ron Paul to help get us there, just like Trump needed Ron Paul to help get him there. All right, so after Charlottesville, Ron wrote an article and he said, of course, that both sides should be condemned. And he said of the alt-right, "No one who sincerely supports individual liberty, property rights, or the right to life can have any sympathy for this type of racial collectivism." Well, so the right to life thing, he was, I guess, talking about some people in the alt-right apparently wanted abortion to be legal because more minorities use abortion services. I personally don't think that even that is a valid argument because more minorities are also willing to engage in criminal activity, and so it's the white people who are going to be scared off if you do outlaw it. Anyway, he has this individual liberty, individual property rights. Yeah, I get it. I want all of that stuff too. How are you going to get there? This has been said before. I mean, nobody is completely anti-collectivist and nobody is completely anti-individualist, right? We all have to work within those systems. So what you're really talking about is using the government to favor one group over another. Well, first of all, groups exist. We know that. They're biological. You can't just wish it away. These groups exist and everyone's aware of it. And you know how this is how you know that these groups are important and they're hardwired into us, which is that when things get bad, and we'll get to the economics, but Ron thinks that there could very likely be a collapse of some kind, greater than the Great Depression. So when that happens, what are you going to see? Are you going to see people coming together? Oh, we love multiculturalism now. No. They want their group. They want their, DNA to be the one that survives. Because there are no longer a surplus of resources. And a surplus of resources is usually created by a capitalist white society. But when you get non-capitalist and multiracial societies, that surplus, as we know, is diminishing. And in one day, as Ron Paul says, the money is not going to be there. And when that happens, let me tell you, they're not going to be about racial harmony. No, if you have a choice, if this apocalypse happens or so, I mean, I'm exaggerating. It could not, maybe it's not going to be that bad, but it'll be enough that people will be suffering. And when that happens, you're going to have to choose between trusting people who look like you and probably act like you, or people who don't. And which do you think people are going to thechoose? I think I know what people are going to choose. They're going to stick with their own. They're going to look out for themselves and the people, their family, and then beyond that, their ethnic group, their tribe, and their race. And that's how it's going to be. So you keep talking about the money running out, but then you also say don't have racial, collectivism. Now, I understand you don't like it when people are using the government for those purposes, but people are using the government for those purposes, okay? And unfortunately, it's not white people that are doing it. It's other groups are using the government for those purposes. So the fact that you're condemning white people for saying, well, hey, these other people are doing this and they're using the government, maybe it's not so bad. If we're using the government for our purposes, that necessarily means that they can't use the government. It is a zero-sum game, and that is the nature of the beast. I'm not for government. I would like to get to a place where we can eliminate it or not need it. And so I'm sorry, that's the nature. It is a zero-sum game. It's not the free market where you can have negotiation. It is zero-sum. Us or them. So don't skirt around that fact, and don't blame one side because they're tired of getting pushed around by people who are collectively using the government against their collective, even though they don't think of themselves as a collective, which has also been designed and pushed in the public schools. So, this is enraging. The fact that he says anyone who supports individual liberty or property rights can't have sympathy for this group. Now, believe me, I don't support everything that the alt-right says. I don't even identify as alt-right. But to say you can't have sympathy for them, that is disappointing, to say the least. Another thing about the racial aspect. Now, I guess Ron Paul, well, he's not even a civic nationalist, right? He can't get himself to say that, we're nationalists. He's a nationalist, because that would imply, enforcing borders and having some kind of restrictions based on merit or whatever. And he says, well, I can't decide that. It should be down to the states or even more local levels. So he just doesn't want to answer that question. He runs away from it. So he's not a civic nationalist, but I can't lump him in with most of the other shitty libertarians. So I'll just say this about civic nationalists. Civnats, they the real white supremacists. That's right, I said it. Civnats are the real white supremacists. And why do I say that? Because They pander to everybody, every group. They pander to every group except for white people. And that implicitly says something. That says we know that white people can take the abuse. The Civ-Nats, and to some degree the libertarians, they say white people can take the abuse because they're better than these other groups. It has to be. Why else would you pander to every other group? Oh, look at these based blacks over here. Aren't they doing so great? And I see this kind of stuff and it sickens me. It's disgusting. Because why aren't you doing that to white people who are suffering? Either you hate white people or you think they are better, supreme. They're so supreme that they can be kicked and spat on and have dirt rubbed in them and made so that they don't reproduce. And, well, you know, that's just your individual problem, and I guess you just need to take individual responsibility, and, you know, that's your fault. That's your fault. Well, at a certain point, we're not invincible, right? I mean, I think we're great. I really love whites, but we're not indestructible. We're vulnerable. We can be erased. It can happen. And it is happening. So we have to push back. We have to ask people to get down to the essence of what they mean when they say, I like Western civilization. I'm pro-Western civilization. Well, then you can't come out and make these kind of comments that say that condemn any kind of racial solidarity. Okay, so we've saved the best for last. Naming you know who. I give Ron Paul a C+. And this is pretty high. I mean, it's probably the highest it could be without actually, you know, naming it. But here we're going to talk about the Federal Reserve. I know. Riveting. So this is from his book In the Fed. He says, "It is and should be a mainstream cause to end the power and secrecy of the Fed. It's my own view that ending the Fed would address the most vexing problems of politics of our time. It would bring an end to dollar depreciation. It would take away from the government the means to fund its endless wars. It would curb the government's attacks on the civil liberties of Americans, stop its vast debt accumulation, and that will be paid by future generations, and arrest its massive expansions of the welfare state that has turned us into a nation of dependence." So I thought that was a great paragraph because it gets to the heart of it. It's got the welfare state in there, the monetary system, which I know it's kind of boring, and somebody asked me actually, why don't you talk more about monetary policy? I'm like, are you kidding? Most people will fall asleep, and I'm not very good at talking about it. But I do have some early videos and stuff about, just how important the money supply is. And so on most issues, I do come down with the Austrian school, which Ron Paul is definitely a big supporter of on economics. But the reason I'm putting this in with you-know-who, or Blue Jays, as my brother likes to say, is, well, I think it's obvious. I don't have to say it, right? I mean, they run the Fed. Okay. Anyway, I hope that doesn't get me kicked off. Please don't kick me off. So, it's been about 1 decade after the financial meltdown, and Ron Paul has basically said that Trump's pick for Fed chairman, this Jerome Powell, is more of the same. However, he is raising interest rates, so... Anyway, Paul writes about the likelihood of the looming economic crisis. So I'm going to read that to you. He says, the Fed is unlikely to significantly raise interest rates because doing so would cause large increases in federal government debt interest payments. Instead, the Fed will continue making small increases while moving slowly to unwind its balance sheet, hoping to gradually return to a normal monetary policy without bursting the everything bubble. So let me insert a little note here about the everything bubble, which he explained earlier. Basically, in this country, it's kind of ridiculous the amount of debt that's going on. We've got $1 trillion in credit cards, $1.5 trillion in student loans, a bunch of unpaid liabilities, $21 trillion in just on the debt payment, the government debt. So he's saying that in 2008, right, we had the housing bubble, and that popped, and that created this huge catastrophic event. They called it the Great Recession. And it took, Obama was slow. He said that he was trying to help things, and the Fed basically kept interest rates at 0 for a long time, which is supposed to help spur the economy according to Keynesians. And normally these things bounce back pretty quickly, right? But some people say that we still haven't fully recovered from that. So, I mean, it's just kind of inevitable. And you've got all these different... Oh, he also said that there's another bubble in the housing market as well. So all of these different things seem like they could be potentials for bubbles. So that's what he means by the everything bubble. And I'll continue. The Fed will be unsuccessful in keeping that everything bubble from exploding. When the bubble bursts, America will experience an economic crisis much greater than the 2008 meltdown or the Great Depression. This crisis is rooted in the failure to learn the lessons of 2008 and of every other recession since the Fed's creation. A secretive central bank should not be allowed to manipulate interest rates and distort economic signals regarding market conditions. Such action leads to malinvestment and an explosion of individual, business, and government debt. This may cause a temporary boom, but the boom soon will be followed by a bust. The only way this cycle can be broken without a major crisis is for Congress both to restore people's rights to use the currency of their choice and to audit and then end the Fed. Amen, brother. Amen. But I will have to criticize him on the language that he uses, right? He says we still haven't learned our lesson. And I have to say, not just with the monetary policy, but this applies to the warmongering as well, and the cultural Marxism, all of these different tentacles out there of the octopus. I just don't know how he can say that the problems in America right now stem from ignorance rather than malevolence. Now, of course, yes, maybe the people, like the common people, are ignorant about it. You could make that case, but I think this is a fault of Ron Paul, is perhaps he doesn't get moral about it. And in some ways you don't want your politicians to do that in a normal society, but like I said, we're not in a normal society, and so our enemies are fighting on a moral war, a religious war. So we have to call out evil where we see it. And certainly it's less It's easier and it's less controversial to say that these problems are because we didn't learn our lesson or something kind of trite like that. But I don't know, does the former congressman really believe that? I have trouble believing. For as much as he has seen in government, that he would be so naive. I think it's more likely that he knows about the evil, but he wants to make it more palatable to people. He wants to keep tempers in check. It's ultimately not going to work, and we know it's not going to work because libertarianisms and libertarians have largely not gotten what they wanted. But Trump, who is, outrightly a nationalist, has done more. Ironically, he's done more for libertarianism than any of the libertarians have. And that's pretty telling. I will rope in here one thing that Stefan Molyneux said in a live chat, just to bring in someone else who I've already covered on Nationalist Scorecard, episode 1. But somebody was asking a question about Blue Jays. You know who. And he was kind of chastising them, saying, if you know who is a problem, what you need to do is outcompete them. And I feel like this is kind of the standard libertarian thing, is outcompete them. And that's free market language, right? It's like, yeah, I would love to have the chance to outcompete them fairly. But they these you-know-whos, these Blue Jays, are using the government and the free market. They're not wedded to one or the other. They're willing to use whatever they can to get their aims accomplished, including violence, I believe. So to just say outcompete them, what does that look like? What does outcompeting them look like? Can you actually outcompete them and be, stay out of the government, be completely principled? I don't know. I'm skeptical of that possibility. So that's why, I don't call myself a libertarian per se, even though a lot of the product, a lot of what we want is the same, right? So yeah, just to close off that section, I'm gonna play a clip here of Ron Paul testifying before the Federal Reserve hearing, where he was given a chance to ask then chairman of the Federal Reserve, Ben Bernanke, to ask him some questions. And he says a very interesting line in there, and let me see if you pick up on the same thing I do.
Mr. Bernanke, if you don't mind, would you tell me whether or not you do your own shopping at the grocery store?
Yes, I do.
Okay, so you're aware of the prices. But, this argument that the prices are going up about 2%, nobody believes it. And the old CPI says prices are going up at 9%. So they believe this. If people on fixed incomes, they're really hurting. The middle class is really hurting because their inflation rate is very much higher than the government tries to tell them. If you loan me $100 and in 2 years from now I gave you 90 back, you'd be pretty upset. But we hand back money back that's worth 10 or 15 or 20% less, and nobody seems to be able to do anything about it. It's very upsetting. But it's theft. If I don't give you your full $100 back, if you loan me $100, I'm stealing $10 from you. So somebody's stealing wealth, and this is very upsetting. But I do want to make a point about prices, because prices go up. That, to me, is not the inflation. It is one of the bad consequences of the inflation, which comes from the increase in the money supply. And that's one of the bad effects. But, you took over the Fed in 2006. I have a silver ounce here. And this ounce of silver back in 2006 would buy over 4 gallons of gasoline. Today it'll buy almost 11 gallons of gasoline. That's preservation of value, and that's what the market has always said should be money. Money comes into effect in a natural way, not in an edict, not by fiat, by governments declaring it is money. But why is it that we can't consider, the two of us, an option? You love paper money. I think money should be honest, constitutional, it's still on the books, gold and silver, legal tender. Why don't we use it? But why don't we allow currencies to run parallel? They do around the world. One of my options, as much as I would like to do something with the Fed, I say the Fed's going to self-destruct eventually anyway when the money's gone. But why wouldn't we legalize competing currencies? Why couldn't people put this in a mattress and get 4 or 5 times much of the value in a few years? So the record of what you've done in the last 6 years is destroy the value of real money.
So yeah, he says somebody is stealing our money. Very interesting. Well, it's effectively what's happening, right? As he says, money, the dollar, this fiat, has lost tons and tons of value. And you don't get that with stable money like, gold or silver. You don't get that with Bitcoin because there's a limited number of Bitcoins. So this is a huge power. And this is how who has come to control so much of our world and our politics. And I, for one, fully support Ron Paul's edict and his call to audit and end the Fed. But I have a feeling the moment you say that, they're going to call you anti-you-know-who. All right, so overall, what do we have? Well, we left with a B- for Ron Paul, for the good doctor, and I can't discount all of the stuff, all of the important shifts in philosophy and economics, in anti-war, and the groundwork that he laid for the MAGA movement and stuff. It is admirable what he's been able to accomplish, and he's clearly a very hardworking man and someone who cares deeply about principles and cares deeply about ideas. But we have to grade him on the Nationalist Scorecard, and so that is the grade. The one thing I didn't touch on here was free trade. It's a little less interesting to me. I mean, Dr. Paul is a free trader. Kind of got similar libertarian views to the immigration debate, and it's definitely not as important as immigration. I love what Trump is doing, frankly, because he's got the slogan fair trade, right? They say free trade. I want fair trade. And really, he's just saying there's no reason that we have to get ripped off by all these other countries. And yeah, that's, like I said earlier, a great demonstration for people of assertiveness. So yeah, don't be principled if the rest of the world refuses to reciprocate your principles. You're not betraying those principles if you decide to actually play the game. So instead, what you can do, and what Trump has shown you can do, is apply leverage, because the United States still does have a lot of leverage. The dollar is still the reserve currency for now. Go listen to Jared Howe if you want to hear more about how that is starting to be undermined. Yeah, but we have leverage, and if we apply it, then we can actually end up getting a better deal than the libertarians would have. Because they would have just said, well, we have to be free trade, and we wish they were free trade, but guess we just have to be free trade and hope that they will be free trade. No, that's passive. You're not going to get what you want that way. And I think people are starting to wake up to this, and we're fed up. We're fed up with the Fed, and we're fed up with getting ripped off and cheated. So I hope this was enlightening for you, whatever your stance is on libertarianism as a whole. I think Ron Paul, he's a bridge. He brings a lot of different people to the table, a lot of people who care about the same things and they want the same things, but they disagree about how to get there. And I hope that we can draw some lessons from this guy while also avoiding the mistakes that he made. All right, that's it for this episode.